of the things that is most exciting to me about this following Jesus, life of following Jesus, is the idea that we can be transformed. The idea that our past doesn't have to determine our future. The idea that Jesus and the power of God is stronger than our biggest mistakes, our greatest accomplishments, and that there's a certain sense of humility that comes from that, acknowledging that who we are and what we have is because of Him. But there's a real encouragement to know that the power of our past doesn't have to control us, that we can be set free. And it's interesting as I think about this, when you read in the Gospels and you read about who Jesus was and what He did, it's sort of interesting that the good news, God's good news, tends to be even better news for those who are worse off. So the worse off you are, the better news God has for you. It is called the good news. The gospel just means good news. But it's the evangelion in Greek, but it just means good news. But when you pause to think about who Jesus encountered and how He interacted with people, it really is those who were worse off. The good news that He brought to them was even better than to the people who thought they already had it together. The people who already had lots of stuff and had great fulfilling lives. The good news of Jesus, it was, maybe a bit better than what they'd had on the surface. But the reality is, we do all have a past, don't we? And the past that we have, we can ignore it. We can pretend it's not there, or we can learn from it. Sometimes we need to acknowledge it so that we can know how to move forward. But the reality is God can redeem our past, regardless of how great it is or how poor it's been, what we've learned, our habits, all of these things. God can redeem this. Now, the family that we grew up in has a lot to do with that. And, there's a lot of norms and narratives that we've picked up from our families of origin, the houses that we grew up in. And some of them are positive and some of them are negative. Maybe you had parents who always just said, don't fight in front of the kids. And so maybe you never even saw your parents fighting because they always were saying, don't do that in front of the kids. We'll do it after they go to bed. Or maybe your family was really loud and there was lots of yelling all the time and they were very boisterous. Maybe that was the norm. Maybe it was like, look, don't go to bed angry, so we're going to have it out right now. Maybe you were part of a family that had the idea of kids should be seen and not heard. And so there was a certain discipline, a certain way things had to go, maybe around your dad or your mom, and there's certain things, right? Or maybe you had a lot of freedom to play and roam and explore. Maybe there's probably some morals or some implication of working hard, what it means to work hard that you were taught in your family of origin, or what that means. Maybe you were taught things about gender roles. Well, you were, and these are things that are often caught, not taught, right? Things like men don't cry. Maybe you were told that. Men don't cry. Or, you know what? The women make the meals. Things like that. Gender roles that were just sort of handed down to you, and you sort of assumed that was normal for everybody until you went to your friend's house and you're like, oh, it's different there. Or until you got married and you realized, oh, they grew up in a different house and their rules and expectations were different from and the assumptions are different from what I brought into this relationship. So we learn things from our families of origin. How to resolve conflict, how to express anger, gender roles, how we connect and bond with each other. So, let me be clear. I'm not saying that this is the Sunday where you learn to blame everything on your parents and everything they did was wrong. That's not the case. But we are given much of who we are from the families that we came from. And Part of the call is to awaken to those patterns that are distinctly yours. Have you ever thought about them? What are your patterns? What are the thoughts and those assumptions that you've been given from your family? And the question is not, does my past impact my present, but rather, how does my past impact my present? And if we're ignorant of it and we don't think about it, we've never taken any time, oftentimes it can impact us in ways that we don't even realize. So I want to look at a passage today from the book of Mark. We're still going through the Emotionally Healthy Discipleship series. We're in week 7, and the title is Break the Power of the Past. Break the Power of the Past. And this week's text is found in Mark chapter 3, but I need to give you a little bit of a context for it first. And so when we come to that, we're gonna read from Mark chapter 3, starting at verse 1, and we can see that Jesus has just sort of started the ministry. He's already called Levi, which is Matthew, and he has begun eating with sinners. He's started to catch the attention of the religious leaders around him, and they don't like what he's doing. They don't believe that what he's saying is true. So let's read this passage, and then we'll explain it a little more. Mark chapter 3, starting at verse 1. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. He said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand, maybe I can do that. No. And his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians, their enemies, how they might kill Jesus. So this really ticked them off. That Jesus was in the synagogue, called this guy up, healed them on the Sabbath. How dare he? And so these guys are so ticked off that they go to some of their own enemies and say, "How are we going to get rid of this guy?" And Jesus has just started the ministry. Like he just is revealing who he is. Just beginning. But the crowd started to follow Jesus. So in verse 7, we carry on. Jesus withdrew with his disciples, so he already had a crowd, to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him. For he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell about him. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, that they might be with him, and that he might send them out to preach and have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter; James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder; Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." Now, isn't that something? Jesus' family was like, what is this guy doing? So, we'll just get back up a little bit here. What's fascinating in this story is part of it is the context. So Jesus starts out in the synagogues. He starts going to the Jewish people to tell them about the kingdom of God being here, that he's brought the kingdom of God with him. He's doing miracles. He's trying to introduce himself to the Jewish people in their religious system, in the synagogues. But, as we read, he is rejected. They do not want to have anything to do with it. No. Don't go healing on the Sabbath. Never mind that you just did a miracle. You did it on the Sabbath. So, you're like, the guy had a shriveled hand, and now it's straight and normal, and you're worried about what day that's on. So, they're not getting it. Okay, they're not getting it. So Jesus starts to change his tack. Mark has this thing, and it's like, this is the point where Jesus said, all right, I can't work in this system, so I'm going to create a new system. I'm going to go outside of the system, and I'll create my own. And so Jesus has all this crowd following him. He calls to him 12 disciples. They represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And that image and that symbolism would have been picked up from the people who were there. It's like, wow, there's 12 main helpers here. Just like there were 12 tribes of Israel. This was very significant. There was a representative, essentially, from each tribe. And the people would be thinking, oh, is he like starting a new nation? What is he doing? Like, this is really a big deal. And in some ways, he is. He is restarting who the people of God are. He is redefining the boundaries. The people of God are no longer just going to be the Jews. It's not going to just have to do with your bloodline anymore. Jesus is foreshadowing, and he's starting something new. So he puts together his team to share his authority and to speak outside the institutions. It's kind of funny that Jesus, like, we never really catch this, but Jesus is going like full on to be like, okay, if you couldn't handle me, fine. How are you going to handle 13 of us? Me plus 12. We're not going to like sit back and do nothing just because you don't like what. Actually, I'm going to expand what I'm doing right in front of you, and we're going to go outside of your structure, and this is going to spread, and this was your chance, And from then on, especially in Mark, the way he deals with Pharisees is much more aggressive. It's much more like, you sure you want to do this here? All right, let's do it. Whereas before, it was only a couple of chapters before. There's a little more understanding. There's a little more hope. Maybe like if Jesus explained it better, they might get it. Evidently, they're not. So he said, all right, we're going to do this different. But these kind of things are kind of crazy. Like, what? What are you doing? So much so that Jesus' own family comes and says, we better get a hold of this guy because he's crazy. He's lost his mind. Isn't that fascinating? Like Mary experienced, we're just about to celebrate this miraculous birth, and we think, oh, wow, Mary, what a lady, to have the Holy Spirit come on her and to say, yes, Lord, whatever your will, I'll do it, as you wish. But then here, like a few years, Jesus is a grown man, but like the family's there saying, man, we better get control of this guy. And they would have known, the family would have known Jesus was a miraculous birth, Jesus was not a normal child, he wasn't named after his father, Joseph. There was a divine narrative that his family would have known. But when Jesus goes this far, they're like, no, this guy's a loony. We cannot, what is he doing? Not only that, but there's family implications. They have an honor and shame society that means what your family members do brings honor or shame to you. Some cultures are still like this in our world, but our culture is very much not like that. It's very individual. So, 18 years old, you go out, strike out on your own, make your own way, be your own man, your own woman, whatever. That tends to be our culture. We don't think very much in terms of honor and shame. But in Jesus' time, very much so. Jesus is going to give our whole family a bad name. And when you do that, that could seriously impact your wealth, your ability to earn a living, your social status, your everything. And so that seems to be the reason why his family would be there trying to take control of him more than anything else. One commentator from a little ways back said it's because he wasn't eating. Now, if you're Italian, you could just understand that. Jesus, you're so skinny. You need to eat a good meal. Come on, have us a meatball. And you're like, you need to eat. These crowds are keeping you. I don't think that was the reason. It wasn't because he wasn't eating. They went to take charge of him. They said he's out of his mind. So there's family implications here. And in another, it's not in this portion. Oh yeah, let's go down to verse 31. Okay, so in between here and there, there's Jesus is driving out a demon. The teachers of the law show up again, and they say, look, Jesus isn't doing this because of God. He's driving out demons because he has a demon. And Jesus is like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? I'm driving out demons because I have a demon. And that's where he says, a house divided against itself cannot stand. If Satan's driving out Satan, he's got a really bad game plan. He's not going to be winning very much. So then he goes on again, verse 31. Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. So it must be a little bit different timing. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. And again, you got to say, they're probably very concerned about what Jesus is doing here. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, hey, your mother and brothers are outside looking for you. And Jesus says in verse 33, who are my mother and my brothers? Then he looked around at those seated in a circle around him and said, here are my mother and brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother. So again, family-wise, this is a huge slap in the face. You kind of hope his mom didn't hear that. But he's essentially redefining who family is. When Jesus comes and shares this, he's saying, look, it's no longer about the blood relatives. I know we talk honor and shame. I know that your family name matters to you and all of that. When his family comes and shows up and they're like, hey, your family's here, your mother. Who doesn't listen to their mother, right? What son doesn't listen to their mother? Even as a grown son, you listen to your mom, right? When you look in the other Gospels, the first miracle, Jesus turns water into wine. The mom is like, hey, Jesus, come on. Can't you can do something, right? He's like, woman, it's not yet my time. All right, get those jugs, fill them with water. Okay, he turns them to wine. He ends up listening to his mother. So he can. But here, it's not about listening to mom. He says, no, the people who do God's will are my mother and brothers and my sisters. What? I mean, this is really quite a revolutionary teaching. We read past it pretty quickly. But the fact that Jesus is redefining who his family is quite incredible. It's talking about his new nation, the new work that he's come to establish, that God's kingdom has come, and that membership in that kingdom makes you part of the family of God. And that is commanding a new level of allegiance over and above your blood relatives. We don't talk about that very much. That's a hard truth. What? But family is everything. I mean, you learned in your family how important it is. Family. Family. We're family. We don't do that. We're family. We don't air our dirty laundry. We're family. Family comes first. Blood is thicker than water. We're family. Jesus said, no, actually. The family of God means anybody can join, and it's about allegiance to God, first and foremost. I don't want anything in front of your allegiance to me. I don't even want your family in front of your allegiance to me. Not even your mom. Not even your dad. Not even your children. Throughout the Gospels, he calls people, hey, come and follow me. And they say, okay, let me go bury my father, and then I'll come right back. No, fine. Let the dead bury their own dead. You come and follow me. How insensitive. Jesus often spoke in hyperbole, okay? That means over-exaggeration to make his point. So let's not forget that. But all throughout, Jesus makes this point that the family of God has a new status. He's doing something new in the Gospels, and he's calling people to lay down their lives, to take up their cross, and to follow him. And part of what that means is putting your family second. What? Yeah. God should be first. He doesn't say don't love your family. But all of these things that we've learned about blood is thicker than water and all, allegiances. God is calling us to a new allegiance, to say, put me first. I am to be first. I don't want any competition. Jesus redefines family as those who do God's will. Now, one of the other interesting things is that Jesus renames some of these 12 that he calls. Peter being the most notable. Levi he calls Matthew. Peter started out as Simon, but he calls him Peter, and eventually says, Peter means rock, and upon this rock I will build my church. But he changes his name and he calls James and John the sons of thunder, which implies they had a bit of a temper. So even if you have a little bit of a temper, it doesn't mean you can't follow Jesus. He can handle it. But he changes their names, and when you think about it, part of that I believe has to do with their history. Right? Your name has something to do. You carry a family name. There's some history with that. There's some pride, maybe. Sometimes there's some baggage, maybe both. But Jesus changes names because he wants to give them a new identity. He said, no, you're going to be Peter. Peter plays such a key role in Jesus' plan of how the kingdom of God has come to earth. Peter, you can read about him in Acts and what Peter did. But Jesus renames them. He changes the implications of their family ties. And you know this. You've probably met people who are named, junior or senior. Sometimes, like I have, my middle name is my dad's first name. And when we named Ezra, his middle name is my wife's maiden name, last name, Douglas. So you do things with names to maybe try to carry on the lineage or family name and things like that. But Jesus is cutting it off, making a fresh start. And so how does this tie in with breaking the power of the past? Well, there's a couple of things, and I'm drawing some of these lessons from our book, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. The first one is to acknowledge how the blessings and sins of your family profoundly impact who you are today. We have to acknowledge it. We can't ignore it. And sometimes it's really hard, right? Because it feels like maybe we're picking on our parents. And especially if our parents have passed on, maybe we say, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, right? Another thing, you're like, I don't want to. But it's really quite important that you acknowledge some of the good things and some of the not so good things that have been passed on. Because we do learn habits from our families of origin. And the Bible has a number of stories that talk about that. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, these patriarchs of the faith, that was like, they were the fathers of the Jewish nation. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yet, when you dig into their stories, it's not really glamorous. They didn't have great marriages. Abraham was willing to give his wife up a couple of times because he thought he might lose his life. Not a lot of honor in that, eh? Okay, say you're my sister. Okay. Oh, yeah, no, she is pretty. Yeah, that's my sister. What? What kind of husband is that? But they're not trusting God. They're anyway. You also have Jacob the deceiver, right? Tricking his father for his inheritance. Like, how deeply deceitful is that? Dysfunctional family. David, Solomon, King David and Solomon, Rehoboam, not to mention David's other kids, not to mention the fact that he had how many wives? Committed adultery, so did his sons, multiple. Solomon went on to have he only had 300 wives and 700 concubines. No dysfunction there, right? I mean, talk about marital bliss. I'm sure, like, which wife would even be happy? So obviously some dysfunction in the relationships, and seeing that in parents and learning those habits and passing them on. So this is throughout the Bible, and the beauty is that God can redeem these stories. And that's what these stories tell us. How God has broken the power of the past, and in spite of the past that we have, and in spite of the past, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were still considered the fathers of the nation, the fathers of faith, in spite of their past. And so we do need to acknowledge, that's the first thing. We can't turn a blind eye. We have to say, and this is what's hard, right? It's really hard to acknowledge some of those things. Secondly, we got to realize that we've been birthed into a new family, the family of Jesus. And it is new. We say, and you've probably heard it said in the church or Christianity, being born again. And you have a new life. You have a fresh start. You have a new family. The family of God. Romans 8:14. I want to read a couple of verses for you. For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. You can. We'll find it on the screen here in just a minute. Those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves, so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by Him we cry, Abba, Father. That's Romans 8:15. So he talks about the Spirit that we received. It doesn't make us slaves to fear. The Spirit we received actually brought about our adoption, our sonship. And Paul is writing to non-Jewish people. He's telling them, you have full rights in this family. When you have the Spirit of God, when you follow Jesus Christ, you are adopted into the family. And by that Spirit, we call Him Daddy, Father. Isn't that a strong statement? They say, hey, no, you don't. You have the Spirit of. If you have the Spirit of God in you, if you're following Jesus and you have God's Spirit in you, you're not just someone who says, yes, I like God. You're a son of God. You're a daughter of God. You're part of that family, and you can call Him Daddy. He's your Father. Verse 16. The Spirit Himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs. Heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ. Just like Jesus was the Son of God, we are sons and daughters, co-heirs with Jesus. If, indeed, we share in His sufferings, in order that we may also share in His glory. And sometimes the suffering means that we have to make some hard decisions about our earthly family in order to be part of God's family. Maybe that's been part of your story. Maybe you have family that doesn't understand that you've made a commitment to follow Jesus. You know, we had that actually quite a bit when I was ministering in Guam. The whole island was sort of colonized by Catholicism. And, Catholics, there's definitely Christians. The Roman Catholic Church is a Christian church. So I'm not questioning that. But what happens when it develops in a whole culture is that you've got a whole lot of people that, just like you would say you're Canadian, they would say they're Catholic. Well, what makes you Canadian? You're like, I don't know. I like these things. I was born here. And it's kind of like that. And so it was really hard to have people, we were not able to reach a lot of the local people there who were born and raised there because of their Catholic roots. Now the interesting thing is, in our churches we had a lot of Filipinos. Now Filipinos often tend to have Catholic roots too. So you say, well, what's the difference? The difference is that the Filipinos who lived on Guam were immigrants. When you're an immigrant, you don't have the same ties. You don't have the same family structure. You've left something behind. Some of you are immigrants here. You know what that means. Your family's back there. It's far away. And then you connect with people here, and they're very real and deep and meaningful relationships. And they're not blood relatives. And you say, oh, that's possible. But we also had one guy in our church who did do that, and he did come out of the Catholic Church. Not that we were always trying to get people out of the Catholic Church, but he did. But it's very difficult because there's a lot of implications for your family, especially if you get married. Well, if you get married, you have to get married in the Catholic Church. There's 21 of them on the island. You've got, and families often will, So there's implications that come with our blood relatives that can sometimes cause tension when we really are feeling a call from Christ to go in a certain direction. Now, I also knew lots of good Roman Catholics who were in the church and served, had active faith in Jesus Christ, vibrant relationship with the Lord. But that was just one example. And our third point is that we need to put off sinful patterns of our family of origin and culture and learn how to do life in the new family of Jesus. And this is what takes time. The author in the book says, Jesus may live in your heart, but Grandpa lives in your bones. Right? Jesus may live in your heart, but Grandpa lives in your bones. And that's ultimately a truth too, isn't it? You've learned how to see the world, how you act and interact. You've learned things from your family. And so part of learning to be part of God's family means sometimes unlearning some of those things. And you say, well, what kind of things might I need to unlearn? Well, again, from the book, there's some examples there. What about the idea that money is the best source of security? Maybe you've resolved in your life, you've made a vow, I will never be poor. I will do whatever it takes. I grew up poor. I am never going back to that. I saw what it did to my parents. I saw what it did to our family. Money is the best source of security. And the more money you have, the more important you are. So if I have lots of money, I've proved that I made it, and that's a value. I would say that's not a biblical value. That would be something you got from your family. What about you owe your parents for all they've done for you? Don't speak of your family's dirty laundry in public. Duty to family and culture comes before everything else. Sometimes that's the case. Those are not from the Bible. What about the idea of don't trust people, they'll hurt you? Maybe learn that from your family. Don't ever let anyone hurt you, and don't show vulnerability. Don't let anyone in. Love sucks. You love at your own risk. You risk, and love hurts. So don't even bother. Maybe it's attitudes toward other cultures. Only be friends with people who look like you. Don't marry outside of our nationality. Maybe it's grief and loss. You don't cry. Men don't cry. Sadness is a sign of weakness. What about anger? Anger is dangerous and bad. Never get angry. Never let your anger show. Or maybe it's the opposite. Exploding in anger at any time is totally okay. Anyway, I won't go through the entire list, but that's a few of those things where you're like, yeah, we learn these types of things from our families. These are just what happened. You have your own. You have your own family rules that you learned, and a lot of times they were unwritten. So sometimes it's hard to know what they were. But you could probably think about trends in your childhood that whenever I did this, this is what happened in my house. Mom did that, or Dad did this. Good or bad. And those patterns are there. And here's why it's important. Because you cannot change anything that you're not aware of. Right? You cannot change that which you are not aware of. So if you're not aware of what's happening, if you're not aware of how that's affecting you, you will never be able to make any changes to that because you're not aware that it's affecting you. But we are called to a new family, to a different family. One of the examples that came to mind for me is the series Band of Brothers. I was thinking of that because it's been Remembrance Day here this last week, and I don't know, I often will watch that series around this time of year. Band of Brothers, it was put out by HBO. It was about maybe an 8 or 10 series bit about World War II, airborne regiment in the U.S. that fought in Europe. And it tells the stories, this arc of training camp all the way to fighting, jumping in D-Day and fighting through the war and all those who made it and those who didn't. But it's called Band of Brothers. And throughout all of it, there's the whole theme is that there's a special relationship that develops between people who have served in combat together. And it's unlike anything else. And these men have fought together, and they've suffered together, and they've died together, and they've been wounded together, and they've celebrated together, and they've cried together, and they've just been through hell, literally been through hell together. And on the other end, this band of brothers had something that tied them together as such a unique group of people. And this has happened in wars all over, and people, but it's a powerful story and depiction of how, regardless of your background, and you see it in the beginning, in the first episode or two, you see these guys, and some of them hate each other. And, some of them are from New York or California. They have different accents. They have different ethnicities. They have different all these. And, some of them start talking smack about each other. They hate, that's what those guys are like. That's what that ethnicity is like. Yeah, and they're fighting they're fighting in the bunks as they're going over to Europe to fight the Germans. But you see, quickly those things get put aside, and through all of it, those other things that divided before have been put aside so that they can be on mission together. And I believe that that's what God and why Jesus has called us to redefine family, His family, or why God's redefined His family as those who will follow Him and put Him first. Because there's a mission and lives are at stake. And He's inviting us into this. But the call is to come and die. To lay down your life for the sake of the cross. To follow the crucified Jesus. To take up our cross. But in the meantime, we get to do that together. We get to be the band of brothers and sisters. And throughout the New Testament, Paul uses these terms. He says, brothers and sisters. And I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, I urge you, brothers and sisters. He talks about a number of times. It's always brothers and sisters. We have the same Heavenly Father. And we're part of the same family. There's only one family of God. And if you're a follower of Christ, you're part of that family. Peter, the one who has had a name change, gets worried about this at one point in Mark 10. And he said, Jesus, we've left everything to follow you. Everyone else is leaving. We left everything. And Jesus said, truly I tell you, no one who has left home or brothers or sisters or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age, homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields, along with persecutions, and in the age to come, eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and many who are last first. So when we are called to give up putting our families first, and we put God first, He said, don't worry. It'll be hard. There'll be persecutions. But you're not going to get nothing in return. You're actually going to have more family than you ever imagined. You'll have more mothers and brothers and sisters than ever under one Heavenly Father. And I can tell you, as I've traveled the world, I've found this to be true. As I grew up and we would go to a church camp, you would hear people addressing each other as brother or sisters. There was an older saint, a senior citizen who was well respected in all of the church in Ontario, and her name was just Sister Wadham. Like, I don't even know what her first name was because it was always Sister Wadham. She was this motherly saint to so many people. And even when I went off to college and left my family behind, when I would come home and go to camp, Sister Wadham would find me, and she'd known me since I was born, and she'd say, I just want you to know, I pray for you every day. What? Why? Why? But what an amazing feeling to think I've got this grandma, essentially, who lifts me before the Lord every single day. And I don't see her, but maybe once a year. Sister Wadham, I pray for you every day, Nathan. I pray that the Lord would equip you. Take you through that college. He'll be with you. You can trust Him. Last week, there was a visitor here who sat in the pew over on that side. I didn't recognize him with the mask on until afterwards. When I was in college, oftentimes when I would go to the Church of God there in Camrose on the main drag, I would go there, and he had little kids at the time. Probably, his youngest was about the age of Ezra, maybe 5 or 6. And they'd want me to come and sit with them. They'd say, oh, come, and they'd wave at me at the back, come sit with me. And I'd go and sit with them, and then they'd want to doodle and stuff, and their mom would have to keep them quiet a bit, and we'd doodle and draw on the bulletin and stuff. And then afterwards, they're like, can you come for lunch? Again, a college student, you're not really one to turn that down, but you have to be polite and say, well, you better ask your mom first. Okay, Mom, shh. Mom, can he come for lunch? Yeah, we'll talk about it after. Sure enough, it started off one week, and she said, look, our family tradition is we do waffles for lunch on Sunday, but if you want to come, you're welcome to come. Sure. I didn't have any family, actually. I didn't have anything to do. Sunday afternoon, college student, I got no food. Yeah, okay. And I developed friendships with these people because they invited me into their house so many Sundays to have waffles with them and their kids. And I would play floor hockey with the kids in the basement. And after lunch, I would sit around and chat about theology and the church and what I was learning in school. Warm welcome. Then in Anderson, when I went to school there, went to church and visited, and there was some missionaries home from China. They were ministering to the Uyghur people on the outskirts in China there. Muslim tribes way out in far, far western China. And they invited me and some of my friends over for lunch. And man, I tell you, a lunch invitation, especially to a college student, is so huge. They said, look, we don't have much. We got tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches. But if you're good with that, come on over. We're like, yeah, no plans. And we met some amazing people. And just being part of the family of God is so awesome. And you gain so much. Brothers and sisters and mothers. And that's who we are to each other, and we can be this to each other. And so that's my dream for us, even as a church, and my call to you together today is to say, look, what if we were to think differently about our own families, right? Now, there's a call. If you have a family, you're called to be with them, to provide for them, to mother, to father, to raise, to discipling your children. You're called. You do have obligations there. You're not called to leave those, right? They're within the limits God has given you that you can enjoy marriage and family. But what if we understood the purpose of our family different? What if we understood the purpose of our family was to expand God's family? I don't mean making more babies. I mean, what if you understood the purpose of your family, of you and your wife, or you and your husband, or you on your own, or you and your daughter, or sister, or brother, whatever your family looks like? What if you understood the purpose of your family as being to expand God's family? That means having people over for grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. That means participating in the service things we have here. Toy drive, car care Saturday, whatever it is. Just loving your neighbors. And what if you saw that as in like, as our family loves our neighbors, we are introducing them to the family of God. Because that's who we're a part of. First and foremost, we are God's family. And so we live in the neighborhood. We're the hands and feet of Jesus. And what if, I just think it would make such a difference. Instead of just understanding our own families as creating our own worlds and, like existing and staying alive, which is sometimes the phase we're in, and I get that, believe me. That was this week for us. But what if we sort of understood our bigger picture of family as being meant to be the family of God? That we can expand God's family by loving other people, by serving other people, by dealing with the things in our past and getting healthy so that we can love well and accurately. I'm so grateful for God who does this in us, who doesn't let us be bound by our past, but can transform us so that we can be part of His family. There's a story, last story here, in one of the commentaries that talks about the president of Asbury College and how his father abandoned their family when he was 10 years old. His mother couldn't really handle him and so forced him to leave when he was 13, at 3 years later. And 13-year-old, kicked out of the house, not much to do, doesn't know how to do anything, but he was taken in by a humble pastor and his wife. And they shared with him the good news about Jesus. And they told about Psalm 27, verse 10, that says, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." But they didn't just share Scripture. They invited them into their home and shared their lives and the bed and the meals and their love with this boy, modeling God's love for him. And I think if the church takes seriously Jesus' ideal of what the family is, we will be able to do those things too. We will be able to understand that loving and creating the family of God means more than just, sharing a donut and a coffee together, even though that could be part of it. But that actually we're called to adopt one another, to be each other's brother and sister, and be caring for one another. And so my prayer is that God would deal with us mercifully in our past and transform it so that we can more fully live into the family of God.